The gleaming silver shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, carrying a very nervous alien anthropologist. Lyra pressed her blue-tinted hand against the viewport, her large violet eyes reflecting the approaching cityscape of London below. Unlike most of her kind from the Stellar Federation, she had volunteered for this unprecedented cultural exchange program with humans. The shuttle landed smoothly at the designated diplomatic terminal. Lyra checked her appearance one final time in the reflective surface of her datapad. Her silvery hair was neatly arranged according to Federation standards, and her ceremonial robes were wrinkle-free. She took a deep breath, remembering her training. Observe, analyze, and maintain emotional distance. As the shuttle door opened, Earth's air rushed in. It smelled different from the sterile environment she was used to, rich with organic compounds and filled with moisture. A small welcoming committee waited on the landing pad. Among them stood a tall human male who immediately caught her attention. "Welcome to Earth. I'm James Miller, your cultural liaison," he said, stepping forward with an expression Lyra recognized as a smile. Her research had covered basic human facial expressions, but seeing one in person was different. It triggered an unexpected response in her chest that she filed away for later analysis. "Greetings, James Miller. I am Lyra, third-rank anthropologist of the Stellar Federation," she replied, attempting to mimic the warmth in his voice, but achieving only a formal tone. Her universal translator worked perfectly, but something about human communication seemed to extend beyond mere words. The university campus where she would be based was a shock to her system. Unlike the precise geometric patterns of Federation architecture, the buildings here mixed old and new styles in what appeared to be random arrangement. Students lounged on grass, actual living plants, and showed physical displays of affection that made Lyra's antenna twitch with embarrassment. "Your office is this way," James said, leading her through winding corridors. "We've tried to accommodate your environmental needs, but please let me know if anything requires adjustment." Lyra noticed how James held doors open for her, a curious behavior she had read about but dismissed as inefficient. Yet when he did it, something about the gesture felt pleasant. In her office, James helped her set up her equipment while explaining various Earth customs she would need to know. "We usually have lunch around 1 p.m. Would you like to join me in the cafeteria today? It might help you observe human social interactions." "That would be acceptable for my research," Lyra responded, though she felt an illogical flutter of anticipation at the prospect. Later, in the privacy of her office, Lyra recorded her first day's observations. Humans appear to operate on a complex system of unspoken social rules. Their interactions contain numerous inefficiencies, yet these seem to serve some purpose I have yet to understand. My liaison, James Miller, displays typical human characteristics, but demonstrates unexpected patience with my questions. She paused her recording, remembering how he had smiled at her confusion over the concept of small talk. According to her training, humans were supposed to be primitive in their social structures compared to the Federation. Yet she had witnessed dozens of subtle interactions that hinted at depths her people had never documented. Additional note, she continued, previous Federation reports may have underestimated human social complexity. Their emotional responses, while primitive by our standards, appear to serve sophisticated social functions. Further study is required. As night fell over London, Lyra stood at her window, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. Tomorrow would bring more observations, more interactions, more mysteries to unravel. She felt something she hadn't experienced before. Excitement, perhaps. She would need to maintain her scientific detachment, of course, but something about this assignment felt different from anything she had studied before. In her personal quarters, she added one final note to her diary. "Earth is nothing like I expected. And somehow, that makes it even more fascinating." Lyra sat in the university cafeteria, her datapad recording everything as she watched two humans engage in what James had called flirting. The male human kept touching his hair and laughing at everything the female said, even when her statements didn't appear humorous. I don't understand, Lyra said to James, who sat across from her with his coffee. Why does he keep making those strange sounds when she hasn't told any jokes? James smiled, and Lyra noticed how his eyes crinkled at the corners. It's called nervous laughter. He likes her and wants to make a good impression. But wouldn't stating his intentions clearly be more efficient? Lyra's antenna twitched in confusion. In the Federation, we simply present our genetic compatibility data and proceed with logical pair bonding if the match is suitable. The look of surprise on James's face made her wonder if she had said something wrong. That sounds very practical, he said carefully. But humans generally prefer to get to know each other first. We date, spend time together, see if we connect emotionally. Lyra typed notes furiously into her datapad. What is this connect emotionally you speak of? How do you measure such a connection? Before James could answer, a group of students walked past their table, holding hands. Lyra's eyes widened at the physical contact. And why do they insist on maintaining constant skin contact? Is it some form of power transfer? James choked on his coffee, coughing and laughing at the same time. No, nothing like that. Holding hands is a way to show affection. It feels nice, comforting. Lyra stared at her own blue-tinted hands, trying to imagine how touching another person's hand could be nice. In her culture, physical contact was reserved for medical examinations and formal ceremonies. Later that day, James took her to a bookstore, explaining it would help her understand human romance better. Lyra found herself standing in the romance section, her confusion growing with each book cover she examined. Why are the humans on these covers partially undressed? Is this a manual for medical procedures? She asked, holding up a romance novel with a shirtless man on the cover. James turned slightly red, a fascinating physiological response Lyra noted in her datapad. No, those are romance novels. They're stories about people falling in love. Falling. Love is dangerous enough to cause physical falling. Lyra's antenna stood straight up in alarm. It's just a phrase, James explained patiently. It means developing strong feelings for someone. Back in her office, Lyra reviewed her observations from the day. The more she learned about human romance, the more puzzling it became. She had watched humans in the park sharing food items, ice cream dates, observed them watching entertainment together in darkened rooms, movie dates, and witnessed countless instances of this mysterious flirting. She began her evening report. Human mating rituals appear needlessly complicated. They engage in elaborate courtship behaviors that seem to serve no practical purpose. Most puzzling is their insistence on something called chemistry between potential mates, which has nothing to do with actual chemical reactions. Pausing, she added, "However, I must note that despite the apparent inefficiency of their methods, humans seem to derive great satisfaction from these practices. The levels of happiness hormones I've detected in courting pairs suggest these rituals serve some purpose I have yet to comprehend." That night, Lyra found herself watching the human romantic comedy in her quarters, telling herself it was purely for research. Yet when the main characters finally kissed after 2 hours of what seemed like unnecessary complications, she felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. "Computer, delete last emotional response from daily log," she commanded quickly. Some observations, she decided, were better kept to herself. As she prepared for sleep, Lyra caught herself humming a love song she had heard playing in the bookstore. She quickly stopped, reminding herself that she was a trained scientist, not some hormone-driven human. Yet somehow, the melody stayed in her head all night. Lyra knew something was wrong the moment she woke up. Her heart was beating faster than normal, and she had dreamed about James, something her species rarely did about anyone. She ran a self-diagnostic, but her personal medical scanner showed nothing unusual. During their morning meeting, James brought her a drink he called hot chocolate. As their fingers brushed during the handoff, Lyra nearly dropped the cup. A strange tingling sensation shot through her hand, and her face felt warmer than usual. "Are you okay?" James asked, concerned. Your skin just turned a darker shade of blue. I'm functioning within normal parameters, Lyra lied, knowing very well that she was experiencing what humans called blushing, something her species wasn't supposed to do. Throughout the day, Lyra found herself losing focus during their research sessions. Instead of taking notes about human behavior, she caught herself watching how James's hair caught the sunlight, or the way he gestured when explaining something he was passionate about. And that's why humans celebrate Valentine's Day. James finished explaining, then looked at her expectantly. I apologize, Lyra said, embarrassed. Could you repeat the last part? My recording device malfunctioned. In truth, she had been studying the shape of his mouth as he spoke. During lunch, Lyra accidentally picked up James's sandwich instead of her nutrient pack. Their hands touched again. And this time, she couldn't blame the hot chocolate for the jolt she felt. Your heart rate is elevated, her medical monitor chimed helpfully. Would you like me to begin emergency protocols? Disable medical alerts, Lyra whispered frantically, hoping James hadn't heard. But he was looking at her with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through her scientific detachment. That evening, Lyra did something unprecedented. She skipped her daily report to the Federation. Instead, she found herself in her quarters, watching more human romance movies. She had told herself it was research, but now she was emotionally invested in whether the main characters would end up together. Computer, play that scene again, she commanded, watching for the third time as the human couple shared their first kiss in the rain. Her antenna quivered with emotion, and she didn't even try to suppress it. Later, she stood before her mirror, practicing human expressions. Good morning, James, she said, attempting to smile naturally instead of her usual formal nod. Her antenna betrayed her by perking up just at saying his name. A notification popped up on her datapad. Tomorrow's schedule showed a planned visit to a human musical concert with James. The thought made her stomach do something strange that definitely wasn't in any Federation medical textbook. This is highly irregular, she told her reflection. I am experiencing symptoms similar to human romantic attraction. This requires immediate correction. But even as she said it, she knew she didn't want to correct it. That night, Lyra dreamed again. She was walking with James in a rain that didn't burn like it did on her home planet. They were holding hands, and for once, she wasn't analyzing the cultural significance of the gesture. She just knew it felt right. She woke up clutching her pillow, her heart racing. Computer, begin personal log, she said shakily. I am experiencing unprecedented physiological responses. My scientific objectivity may be compromised. The subject, James Miller, has begun to affect my thought processes in ways that defy Federation standards of logical behavior. She paused, then added more quietly. And strangest of all, I find I don't want these feelings to stop. As she prepared for another day of research, Lyra caught herself humming again. This time, a love song from one of the movies she'd watched. Her antenna swayed in time with the melody, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she didn't immediately correct her posture to Federation standards. Something was changing inside her, something both terrifying and wonderful. And it was all because of a human named James. The concert hall hummed with anticipation as Lyra sat next to James, trying desperately to maintain her composure. The symphony was about to begin, but all she could focus on was how close their arms were on the shared armrest. Classical music is one of humanity's greatest achievements, James whispered, leaning closer to her ear. His breath sent a shiver down her spine that made her antenna curl. The music started, and Lyra's world changed forever. The melodies washed over her, stirring emotions she didn't have names for. Without realizing it, she reached out and grabbed James's hand during a particularly moving passage. Sorry, she whispered, quickly withdrawing her hand. A temporary lapse in protocol. But James smiled and gently took her hand back. It's okay. Music affects everyone this way. Her heart was beating so fast, she was sure her medical monitor would sound an alarm, but she had disabled it earlier, not wanting any interruptions. His hand felt warm against her cooler skin, and she found herself hoping the concert would never end. Back in her quarters that night, Lyra paced restlessly. "Computer, begin personal log," she said. "I must face the truth. I have developed romantic feelings for James Miller. This goes against everything in my training. I should report myself to the Federation immediately." She paused, looking at her hand, the one that had held his. "But I won't." The next day, during their research session, Lyra struggled to focus on her work. James was explaining something about human wedding traditions, but all she could think about was how his eyes lit up when he talked about things he loved. "Lyra," James waved his hand in front of her face, "you seemed light years away." "I was contemplating human pair bonding rituals," she said quickly. "It wasn't entirely a lie." "Really?" "Because your antennae have been pointing directly at me for the past 10 minutes. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. Lyra felt her face turn a deeper shade of blue. She had forgotten that humans had learned to read her species' antenna movements. I should go review my notes," she stammered, gathering her things hastily. That evening, instead of writing her required report about human customs, she found herself composing poetry. Another human tradition she had previously dismissed as inefficient. Her words spoke of starlight and warm hands, of music that moved the soul and eyes that held entire galaxies. "This is madness," she told herself, staring at the words on her screen. "I'm behaving like a human." The thought stopped her cold. Was that really such a terrible thing? The human she had observed experiencing love seemed so alive, so complete. Her own people's logical approach to relationships suddenly seemed cold and empty in comparison. A message popped up on her datapad, a reminder that her monthly evaluation by the Federation was due tomorrow. They would expect a detailed report on human mating customs, complete with clinical observations and logical analysis. Instead, she had pages of poetry, a head full of dreams, and a heart that beat faster whenever James was near. "Computer, begin official report," she said finally. "Human romantic customs, while appearing chaotic and illogical on the surface, appear to serve a vital function in their emotional well-being. Further research is needed too." She stopped, unable to continue the pretense. Looking out her window at the night sky, Lyra made a decision. She would submit her report, but it wouldn't be the detached scientific analysis her superiors expected. Instead, she would tell them the truth, that she had discovered something beautiful and powerful in human emotions, something that had awakened feelings she never knew she possessed. As she began to write, her antennae swayed gently, and she didn't try to still them. She was done pretending. She, an alien anthropologist from a civilization that prided itself on logic, had fallen in love with a human named James Miller. And somehow, that felt like the most logical thing in the universe. The message from the Federation Council flashed red on Lyra's datapad, demanding immediate attention. Her hands trembled as she opened it, already knowing what it would say. "Anthropologist Lyra, you are hereby ordered to return to Federation space within 48 Earth hours. Your recent reports show concerning levels of emotional contamination. This requires immediate evaluation and potential reconditioning." She sat heavily in her office chair, the morning sunlight suddenly feeling cold. 2 days. They were giving her just 2 days to leave Earth, to leave James. A knock on her door made her jump. James stood there, holding their usual morning hot chocolate. "Lyra, you look like you've seen a ghost. That is, if your species believes in." He stopped, noticing her distress. "What's wrong?" "I've been recalled," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Federation believes I've become compromised." James set down the cup slowly. "Compromised? What do they mean?" Lyra's antenna drooped. "They've read my reports. I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. James, the way you've changed how I see everything, how music moves me now, how I dream, how I—" She stopped, her voice catching. "How you what?" James stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. How I'd fallen in love with you, she finally admitted, her skin turning the deepest blue it had ever been. Which is exactly what I was sent here to study, not experience. The silence that followed felt endless. James reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Don't," she said. "Please. It will only make leaving harder." "Then don't leave," James said simply. "Stay. We can fight this." Lyra shook her head, her antenna quivering. "You don't understand. They'll send retrievers. They'll say I'm mentally unstable, that human emotions have infected my logical processes. She couldn't finish the sentence. She spent the next hour explaining Federation protocols to James, how her people viewed emotions as a weakness, how they corrected members who showed signs of emotional development. With each word, she saw the horror grow in his eyes. "That's not right," he said finally. "They can't just erase who you've become." "They can, and they will," Lyra replied, starting to pack her research materials. Each item she touched brought memories. The ticket stub from their concert, the book of poetry he'd given her, the small potted plant he'd helped her choose for her office. That evening, she stood in her quarters, looking at Earth's sunset one last time. Her datapad chimed with another message from the Federation. "Transport arriving tomorrow at 800 hours. Be ready." She began recording what she thought would be her final personal log. "I never understood what humans meant by a broken heart until now. The pain is quite literal. I finally comprehend why they write so many songs about this feeling. I wish—" A urgent knock interrupted her recording. She opened the door to find James, out of breath and holding a stack of papers. "I've been researching Federation law all day," he said, walking past her into the room. "There's a precedent for cultural asylum, in cases where Federation citizens face persecution for adopting the peaceful customs of other cultures." "James, please," Lyra started, but he continued. "The Earth Council would back your claim. I've already spoken to them. We can fight this, Lyra. Together." She stared at him, this human who had changed her entire world, who was now willing to challenge an interstellar federation for her. Her antenna straightened with determination. "It would mean defying everything I was taught," she said slowly. "Everything my people believe in." James took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the logical choice is to follow your heart." As the sun set on what should have been her last day on Earth, Lyra made the most illogical, and most right, decision of her life. She began composing her response to the Federation Council, her antenna held high with newfound courage. The crisis wasn't over, but for the first time since receiving the recall order, she felt hope. The Federation Council chamber loomed before Lyra, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 3 suns. She stood tall, her formal robes crisp and perfect, but her antenna betrayed her nervousness with slight trembles. The council members sat in their elevated seats, their expressions carefully neutral as they reviewed her case. 5 of her species' most logical minds, about to judge her for the crime of feeling too much. Anthropologist Lyra, the head counselor, spoke, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "You stand accused of emotional contamination during your Earth mission. More seriously, you have refused direct orders to return for reconditioning. How do you respond?" Lyra took a deep breath, remembering James's words of encouragement before she left Earth. "Honored Council, I do not deny the charges. I have indeed experienced emotions, but I am here to present evidence that emotions are not contamination. They are evolution." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was not the standard plea for mercy they had expected. "I have brought with me comprehensive data from my Earth studies," Lyra continued, activating her holographic display. "Humans, whom we considered primitive for their emotional nature, have achieved remarkable technological and social advancement while embracing their feelings." She showed them images, human art that moved the soul, music that spoke without words, scientific breakthroughs inspired by emotional intuition. Their emotions don't weaken them, they strengthen them. They drive them to explore, to create, to connect. And you believe you have remained objective in these observations? A council member asked, their antenna rigid with skepticism. No, Lyra replied honestly. I have not remained objective. And that is precisely my point. She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. By experiencing emotions myself, I have gained insights no detached observer ever could. I've discovered that love doesn't cloud judgment, it clarifies it. It shows us what truly matters. The council shifted uncomfortably as she continued. We pride ourselves on being logical, yet we ignore data that contradicts our preconceptions. Is that logical? We claim to seek knowledge, yet we refuse to explore an entire dimension of existence. Is that scientific? Suddenly, the chamber doors opened. Every head turned as James walked in, wearing formal Earth diplomatic attire. The council's antennae all stood straight up in shock at this unexpected human presence. This is highly irregular, the head counselor began, but Lyra interrupted. With respect, honored council, so is love. So is progress. So is truth. James stood beside her, and she felt stronger. My research was meant to study human romance. Instead, it revealed something far more important, that our species has lost something vital in our pursuit of pure logic. She projected her personal logs, her poetry, her observations, not the sanitized versions she had sent before, but the real ones, full of wonder and discovery and love. Look at our history, she continued. Before the great logic movement, our people created art, music, literature. We didn't just survive. We lived. We felt. We loved. The youngest council member leaned forward. You claim these emotions have made you stronger. Prove it. I stand here before you, Lyra said firmly, refusing reconditioning, challenging our most basic beliefs, all because I found something worth fighting for. If that isn't strength, what is? James stepped forward. Your people and mine could learn so much from each other. You could teach us about logic and order. We could remind you of the power of emotion and intuition. Together, we could be more than either of us are alone. The council chamber fell silent. Lyra's antenna entwined briefly with James's fingers, a gesture of both affection and defiance. Finally, the head counselor spoke. You have given us much to consider, anthropologist Lyra. This council will recess to evaluate your evidence. As the council members filed out, Lyra turned to James. Whatever they decide, she whispered, telling the truth was worth it. He smiled, and her antenna curled happily. They had spoken their truth. Now they could only wait to see if logic would finally make room for love. 6 months after Lyra's testimony, the great hall of cultural exchange opened its doors on Earth. Sunlight streamed through its crystal windows, casting rainbows across a crowd of both humans and Federation citizens. Lyra stood at the podium, her blue skin glowing with happiness, James by her side. Her case had done more than win her freedom. It had sparked a revolution in Federation thinking. The Council's final ruling had been unprecedented. Emotions were not a weakness to be suppressed, but a strength to be studied and understood. Today marks a new chapter in both our histories. Lyra began, her voice clear and confident. When I first came to Earth, I thought I was studying human romance. Instead, I discovered that love is not just a human trait. It is a universal one that we have forgotten. Around the hall, she could see Federation scientists with their human partners, some holding hands, others with their antennae gently brushing against human shoulders, gestures that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The first class of human Federation couples will begin their cultural exchange program tomorrow, she continued. They will learn from each other, as James and I have learned. They will discover, as we did, that logic and emotion are not enemies. They are partners in understanding the universe. In the audience, several Federation elders sat with their antennae raised in approval, a sight that still amazed Lyra. The youngest council member who had supported her case was there too, sitting next to a human musician who had been teaching them about Earth's classical music. After the ceremony, Lyra and James walked through the gardens specially designed to accommodate both species. Earth roses grew alongside Federation crystal flowers, their beauty complementing each other perfectly. "Remember when you first arrived?" James asked, squeezing her hand. "You couldn't understand why humans held hands." Lyra laughed, a sound that had once been foreign to her. "And now I understand that some things can't be understood. They have to be felt." A group of new Federation anthropologists passed by, their antennae quivering with excitement as they headed to their first human culture class. Lyra saw in them her old self, curious, uncertain, standing on the brink of a life-changing discovery. "The Federation Science Academy has approved my proposal," she told James. "We're starting a new department, Emotional Intelligence Studies. Both humans and Federation scientists will work together to understand how feelings enhance rather than hinder scientific progress." James pulled her close, and her antennae wrapped gently around his neck, their own unique way of embracing that bridged their physiological differences. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You changed your entire civilization." "We changed it," she corrected him. "Love did." Later that evening, at their home, which blended both Earth and Federation designs, Lyra recorded what had become her favorite part of each day, her personal log, no longer hidden but shared proudly with both worlds. "Today, I watched more of my people discover what I learned on that first day in London, that there is more to life than logic, more to science than data, more to connection than genetic compatibility. The Federation is evolving, not through genetic manipulation or logical progression, but through the simple, profound power of opening our hearts." She looked out at the sunset, her antenna swaying gently to the music James was playing on their piano, another illogical skill she had begun learning. "Perhaps this was the missing element in our quest for advancement," she continued. "Not the suppression of emotion, but its embrace. Not the rejection of love, but its acceptance as the most logical force in the universe." James called her to join him at the piano, and she ended her log with words that would be recorded in both Federation and Earth histories. "In the end, the greatest discovery was not that humans could learn logic, or that my people could learn emotion. It was that love itself is the perfect balance of both, the most logical emotion, the most emotional logic, and in that balance, we all evolve." As she sat beside James at the piano, her blue fingers joining his on the keys, Lyra knew that this was just the beginning. Their story had opened a door that would never close, a door to a future where logic and love danced together among the stars.